Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the Let's Talk Social Innovation podcast. I hope you've had an amazing start to your week, but if not, we can kickstart that right here. I'm your host, Ian Kahinde, and as always, y'all know the deal. Business is business. Got to get through this week's bulletin board. So first off, the 2025 FHC Research and Creative Expression Symposium will be held on Friday, March 28th at the University Club on the Pittsburgh campus. Apply at the link in the description below to present your work by February 26th. Next up, applications are open through Wednesday, February 26th for paid summer fellowships and internships with FHC's Offices of Research and Community Engaged Learning. Programs include the Frederick and Keefe Public Service internships, along with these fellowships: Brackenridge, Community Research, Creative Arts, Health Sciences, and more. Check out the link in bio to learn more. Next up, join FHC in a special visit to Brewhouse Arts in Southside on February 27th from 4 to 5:30. This will be a unique chance for a behind-the-scenes look at the Art Center with Executive Director Natalie Sweet and current exhibition When the Lights Come On, curated by Hannah Turpin. Food and honors OCC points will be available for those in attendance. Only 20 spots are available, so make sure you pick yours ASAP with the link in the description. Next up, join the Frederick Honors College for a visit to August Wilson House on Friday, February 28th. This is a unique opportunity to immerse yourself in the world of Pittsburgh poet and playwright legend August Wilson. Most of his work is based in Pittsburgh and is informed by his experiences in the Hill District. There will be transportation arranged to and from the August Wilson House. You'll meet FHC staff in front of the Oaklander Hotel at 2 p.m. and return back to campus at 4:30. Claim your spot at the link in the description below. And lastly, the Human Flourishing Symposium, Exploring Pathways to Thriving, takes place on March 24th, inviting you to showcase your research projects or creative scholarship through poster presentations. This is a unique opportunity to share your work with interdisciplinary audience of scholars, practitioners, and community members who are passionate about fostering resilience, equity, and well-being. Submissions are due by February 28th. So just about now, y'all should be seeing something on your screen with links and descriptions to everything that we just talked about in this bulletin board. But anyways, y'all, everything else aside, the real reason we are here, the incredible Kyle Wyche, CEO of Ecotone Renewables. We are here in their warehouse in Pittsburgh, PA. How are you feeling today?
We're feeling great. It's really great to meet you, Ian. Thank you for coming out. Happy we could do this today. And happy Friday to everybody watching. Super excited to be speaking with you today.
Yeah, I appreciate your time because there's been a lot of planning going into this. It's been sort of crazy.
It has. And, that's how it is with a startup. There's always plans. We're always changing schedules, but very booked. So I'm glad you could accommodate this time.
Yeah, so y'all, for all of y'all watching and listening, as we always do, we'll be going through Kyle's backstory, what's made him the man he is today. We'll be touching on his work with Ecotone. And in the second half, after our artist spotlight, we'll be getting into this week's topic, which is emotional vulnerability within the Black community.
That sounds great.
So anyways, take me from the beginning, Kyle.
Oh boy, where do I start? Let's see. So grew up in the Philadelphia area. So Wynmore. When I was growing up, I was really interested in science. I was always in the backyard, in the creek, looking at the snakes, the salamanders, the crayfish, everything I found in the creek, and was super interested and excited about that. I learned early on that I had a passion and enjoyment in growing plants and gardening. So I've been doing that all my life and continue to do that now.
So when and where did that really start?
It's hard to say when. My parents like to say that when my mom used to push me around in a stroller, she would point out a bush and have me touch it and say that's a bush. And so she says that's where the plant enthusiasm came from. But who knows? I can pinpoint a time when one of my hobbies evolved, which was terrarium building. And that really started when I saw a maple seed coming down one of those little helicopters. I took that, I put it in a wet paper towel, stuck it in a plastic sandwich baggie, blew some air in it, and then let it sit. And I saw the little plant growing. And I realized that's a micro ecosystem I'm pretty much making there.
See, you're wired different. It's who thinks about this?
I like growing plants. And from that point on, I tried to experiment with different seeds. And so I do avocado seeds, I do mango seeds, and that's where the interest of growing plants that aren't native to that environment kind of started for me. So growing avocado and mango trees was really interesting to me because I wouldn't be able to grow them outside in my backyard because of the temperature changes, but I could grow it inside in a climate that I could create for the plant to grow. And so that's where I got really interested in how you can make these microclimates, and that evolved into one of my hobbies. And then side businesses is terrarium building, which is, for anybody not sure, it's building you have a glass bowl. That glass bowl is completely closed. You put the plants, the dirt, some water in there, and then you just let it grow. So there's not really any inflow or outflow of moisture or oxygen or carbon dioxide. Whatever's in there is in there, and the plants are regulating the oxygen and the carbon dioxide changes. And then the vapor, well, you have the whole transpiration process going through the plant's roots, up out through the leaves and back down. So the only change that's really happening is the energy change between what kind of light is going in there and the sunlight, or the temperature change. But I thought that was super interesting getting involved in.
See, and that's where you and me are different, because like I struggled through chem. That's your life. Like I'm not doing all that. So while we're still on this topic, let me ask you this: what is your favorite plant?
What is my favorite plant? I've got a lot. I think one of them is the Brazilian rain tree. Partly one of my favorites because you can actually see it moving. So with that plant, it's got these tiny leaves, and in the morning when the sun comes up, it's got a circadian rhythm almost, where the leaves open up, and then at night when it's going down, the sun's going down, the leaves fold down, and they look like raindrops.
Oh, that's cool.
So that's one of my favorites, just because of how much change you can actually see it moving. Another one of my favorite is a Thai constellation Monstera plant. I think I really like that because of the variety in the leaf variegation. There's the green leaves, but then they have these striations of white throughout them, and I love that because it's a mutation almost. And for some reason that is valuable. But I think it's a really pretty plant.
So let me ask you this: so growing up in Wynmore, what was it like going through the primary school system?
Good question. So I started out in a private school. I went from pre-K all the way up through, I think it was 4th grade. And then I left that school into a public school in 5th grade. And it was nice because at that time, this public school, it had a few different elementary schools that fed into the one public school. And so everybody coming to that public school was pretty much new and getting to know everybody. So it was a great time for me to transition. Yeah, so this school was great. I stayed there in middle school and then high school and graduated from there. Really enjoyed my time in high school. I was involved in many different areas. Still kept my interest in the terrarium building and those hobbies of gardening. On top of that, I was involved in theater. So I loved acting. In middle school and partly high school, I was also in chorus. All the
Okay.
singing, all that was really enjoyable. I remember starting out as a soprano and then moving my way down to a tenor.
That puberty.
Yeah, definitely. And then other hobbies included sports. So I played football in middle school, and then I ran track in middle school and high school. And I actually broke my hip running track. I
Oh,
think it was my
wow.
first year in high school running track. It was a really cold day. It was rainy out. I didn't stretch very well. My muscles were tight. It was a gravel track, so it wasn't pretty. And we were running the 4x1, and I was that anchor leg. And I love a good race. So we were not in the lead, but I had a good chance to get us back into the lead and win. And so I love chasing somebody down. And as I made that turn and started speeding up, I heard a big pop in my right hip. And then I felt a pain, and I was like, I'm not going to finish this race.
Yeah.
So I dove off to the side, couldn't really get up. I didn't know what was going on. But over time, I realized like my muscles were too tight and they were pretty strong, and they just ripped part of my bone off.
Too strong for your own good.
I know. Yeah. So that was a recovery process. Took some time, a few months, but got back on my feet, started running track again the next year. Absolutely loved it. Ran that all throughout high school. I actually made that transition in high school. I decided after my freshman year, I was not going to play football anymore and just devote my time to track. And
No CTE here.
yeah, that's what led into the decision. I didn't want any concussions. I didn't want to break any bones. And my passion was really running track. And that's where I flourished in. So I kept that up. Ran the 4x1, 4x4, the 400 relay, or 400 was my favorite race. It's a mental race where you have to learn like when to speed up, when to stick to your speed, and like knowing where you are in the race because everybody's staggered. You just got to be confident that you know where you are. You're running your own race, and then the last turn, it's like, okay, you really speed it up and need to know where you're gonna place. But yeah, I absolutely love track. Had a great experience, sports in high school, the activities. Um, I was an honors student, so I enjoyed really diving into those classes. I took a few AP courses. One of my favorite was actually AP art.
Oh,
Yeah.
wait, what is the exam like for that?
We had to make a portfolio of a few different artwork pieces, all coalescing on everything we learned that year. So pretty much there was a wood piece, there might have been a clay piece, there might have been a pastel or painting piece. And so we bring all those pieces that we did during the year together and create a portfolio and then kind of get graded on that.
That's cool.
But it it was so much fun. I love working with my hands and building something from an idea that I drew out on a piece of paper. One of my favorite pieces was actually a sculpture representing the voyage that some slaves had made and African Americans had made overseas during slavery. So I designed or sculpted out a foot, and I sculpted out a hand. At the time, I was really interested in sculpting out body parts, and the hand was really intricate to me. So I was doing a lot of drawings, and then the sculpture was awesome. And then I made some chains that interlocked, and once it dried, you could move it, and it really sounded like real change.
That's awesome.
And then I made this wooden piece to go with it that represented the boats and the planks and whatnot. So that kind of told a story of the voyage for some African Americans and for some slaves at the time. But was really enjoyable piece to make.
Yeah, running through that in high school, that's crazy, man.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. So in terms of your terrariums, your gardening, just like what's the word I'm looking for? I guess just life journey as well. Something that you've told me previously is that you competed in the Philadelphia Flower Show in high school. What was that like?
That was a fun experience. And I say fun because it was rewarding. It was a little bit challenging. And it was an experience where I got to put myself out there into a community that I wasn't really, I guess, privy to or didn't know much about at the time. So the Philadelphia Flower Show, for anybody listening who isn't too familiar with it, it's an annual show that happens in Philadelphia at the convention center where there's millions of flowers and art pieces and people coming together to design these booths and these even some murals with flowers and whatnot. And so it's a large art piece that you can go through and exhibit. And so at the time, they have something called the challenge plant. What you would do is you pick up a plant in September. They have like 5 different types you can choose from. And then you have from September until the end of February to grow that plant. And then you put it into the competition on the flower show. And you get judged on how well you grew it based off of how healthy it looks, how large it is, the flowering it can do. And funny enough, I'm actually competing again this year.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been like 10 years since I last competed. But my father and I both got plants this year. And we've both been growing them since September. And then the flower show this year is coming up in about a week. March 1st is when it's starting. So going to be inputting or competing that, as well as a terrarium that I'm building, a carnivorous terrarium.
Hey, best of luck with that.
Thank you.
So is your dad as much as a greenhead as you are?
I think I learned a little bit of what I do in my green thumb from both my parents. So he loves gardening, and we have a few raised bed gardens at the house. I think we have about 3 of them. And so each year he and I will grow our plants indoors to start with: tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, all of that. And then we transplant it into the garden outside. And so we've been doing that for the last 3 years. So he loves growing plants, especially ones that you can take in and eat, as opposed to like going to the grocery store to get them. And then my mom, she's a flower bed in the front yard. So both my parents are very into plants as well.
See, here's the thing. If you got raised flower beds, you're already like further ahead than 99% of everybody else. Like you're definitely into gardening.
Ian, there's something so satisfying about like growing your own fruits and veggies in the backyard, taking inside, making a salad, or just seeing where that comes from. I think there's something very rewarding about putting in the effort, putting in the time to grow these plants and reaping that fruit. So yeah, we love
Literally.
it. Yeah, exactly.
See, look, I'm excited to get into that because I'm actually gonna get an aquaponic garden in a couple months. I want to just like grow some like spinach, tomatoes indoors. I think
Nice.
it's gonna be cool. Plus, like obviously the plus side is I get to see some fish too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds fun. That sounds like a lot of fun. I've dabbled in aquaponics and hydroponics in the past. It's a lot of fun to do, and again, pretty rewarding too if you build your own system.
So moving forward out of high school, take me through your college experience.
Sure. So coming out of high school, I was trying to think of what major I'd want to study, and I had three really main focuses of interest. They were astronomy and astrophysics. I love astronomy. I have a couple of telescopes. I also love astrophotography. So hooking up the camera and being able to take some celestial shots. Maybe taking them of the moon's a pretty easy one for me, which I love, seeing the craters and the different tones of the moon, I guess. Right? And then Saturn, the other planets, Mars, and then even further out. Eventually, I would love to have a deep enough telescope that can see other galaxies. That would be really interesting to me. And being able to take those shots as well. There's like a science to getting the perfect shot for astrophotography. So that was one of the interests. Biology was another one. And then environmental science, because I love sustainability, love the environment, learning more about nature. And so I saw how all those kind of merge together. If you take astronomy, for example, and the elements on a chemistry board or elemental table, you can see where some of those elements come from. So like in a star, once it explodes, you could have a planetary nebula, which is an exploded star. And at the core of those stars are where those elements are kind of being formed. So when that star explodes, like our sun, you're kind of seeing how all those elements are right there. And over time, they can kind of form into these larger pieces of matter. And how what I was really interested in seeing how that connects to everything on Earth, of how looking at the human body, for example, you have tissue. That tissue can coalesce, can form into eventually organs. Those organs can form into eventually an organism of these interlocking organs that are working together. This tissue and all this bacteria and living matter that forms human beings. And it's really interesting to see how all that comes together. But to me, it was super interesting to see how those elements were the same ones that you can see in a planetary nebula.
I like how you can pull that Neil deGrasse Tyson like switch off there. It's sort of crazy. I literally felt like I was watching one of his videos right there.
Neil deGrasse Tyson, I love everything he does. His work. I actually got to meet him in high school. I went to one of his speaking engagements, and afterwards we had tickets to go meet him in person. And he signed one of the books I was reading. So he was an inspiration for some of my senior work in high school, where at the end of the year we had a senior thesis or a project where we had to put on a big presentation. And I pretty much took people through exactly what we just talked about, starting big picture with space, talking about how stars implode and how matter forms and gravity pulls it all together. And then I pulled it from this large picture down to the everyday life and tried to connect people to seeing this bigger picture. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson. I hope I can meet him again someday.
That's pretty sick.
Yeah. So that's a little tangent, but going back to college, entering college, I had three major interests: the biology, astronomy, environmental science. Starting out, I went to the University of Pittsburgh. I was super interested in that school because they also had the opportunity for me to choose my own major path and kind of merge them all together. So the first year or two, I was trying to figure out how I could merge them all together. I realized that triple major at the time was not in my best favor, just based off the amount of time it was going to take. So I quickly tried to realize how I could put them together to get out of it what I really wanted. And I think what I really wanted was being able to study all of them to the best of my ability. But to do that, there's some trade-offs. I can study them somewhat superficially, or I can study them really in depth, really learning a whole lot about them. And so I wanted to balance that. I decided keeping physics and astronomy and astrophysics as a hobby more so. And then the biology and environmental science, I somewhat merged that together. And I found the major ecology and evolution, which really focused on the biology and the environmental science and how ecosystems are formed, where, like I talked about with the human body, different organisms are working together to keep this ecosystem running. So I was super interested in that, and I kept with ecology and evolution as my major, and then chemistry was also an interest of mine, so I kept that as a minor. And during that time, I dabbled in many different areas. I had a lot of experiences both with on-campus activities like clubs and off-campus, so study abroad opportunities that helped merge my interests together a little bit more. Happy to dive into some of those as well.
I was just about to ask, you did study abroad in the Amazon rainforest.
Yeah.
How was that?
That was an experience.
And then also, like, one thing about a lot of people who do come onto this pod is they do have a lot of study abroad experience. And they talk about becoming a global ambassador and how much that impacted their worldviews. If you can get into that too.
That's interesting. The way I kind of think about it is like a global citizen. And in that sense, you are looking out for people around the world. The thing I love about studying abroad, especially in college when sometimes it's more affordable or easy to get into, is I learned a lot about different cultures at the time. And so where I specifically studied abroad was Quito, Ecuador, South America. And the main focus of that trip was to go study tropical biology in the Amazon rainforest, which I did. And I had an amazing time. The part about what you said, the global ambassador, and the thing I'm thinking about global citizen, is when you go on these trips, and what I did when I was there is you get to meet students from different backgrounds. You get to meet students from different colleges, and everybody's crossing paths at that one moment. And so you get to see different perspectives. We were on the trip with some students from a Mormon school, and that was super interesting to learn about their background, their perspective on life, and just the difference between their school and the University of Pittsburgh. So I really appreciated staying up super late, talking to them, learning more about who they are, why they came to the Amazon, what they're interested in, and then seeing the connections between how we have very different backgrounds, but we both merged on this interest together. And for that short period of time, over a month, we got to work together and build that relationship. So that was super interesting. But to get back to like the Amazon rainforest, we studied abroad in the Amazon rainforest in Napo, Ecuador. And specifically, we were in the Yasuni National Park. To get there, we flew into Quito. We traveled to Yasuni area. We took the Napo River. We traveled down 3 hours down the Napo River on this very long boat. It was super cool. As we're traveling down this river, you look up into the trees, which are like 40 feet tall. They're super, very tall compared to some of the trees outside here. And up in the treetops, you'd see some howler monkeys. You'd see tropical birds flying past. In the river beside us on the side, you'd see some capybaras.
Dude, that's like a movie right there.
It was really interesting. And these capybaras look like giant guinea pigs.
Yep.
So that was pretty interesting. Some of my colleagues actually jumped in the water, and for a better picture,
Y'all are crazy.
No. I agree. I didn't jump in the water.
I was gonna say we know not to jump in the water.
If I could see the bottom of the river, sure, maybe I'd get in because I can see what's around me. But this river was like muddy, so you couldn't see anything. You don't know what you're jumping into. And I grew up on movies like Anaconda, so giant snakes. I just was not jumping in that river. But once we traveled down the river, we got to the Yasuni National Park. We took a staircase up into the woods, and we stayed there for the month. And what we did while we were there is we stayed in these cabins. The walls were pretty much from the ground here to the ceiling, all netting. So it was like an open environment where it was super humid out there, very warm all the time. You could hear the trees swooshing in the wind. You could hear the tropical birds. At night, you'd hear the tree frogs and the crickets and all the bugs. Just, it was peaceful, I think. If you're okay with large spiders that you'd see every once in a while.
I mean, honestly, look, when I go back to Nigeria, it's just crazy to see how big some of these bugs can get. There was a cockroach that's like probably like this big. Came into my bathroom. I screamed. I took too much.
It's super interesting.
Nature's crazy, man.
It is. And I absolutely love the trip. I mean, that was one of my experiences that I will not forget. I celebrated my 21st birthday there, and we went to dinner. And as we were sitting there at the dinner table, inside there's these thatched roofs.
Mm.
And we looked up and the hay is kind of like moving. I was like, oh, what's that?
Oh boy.
And so next thing you know, a sloth head pops out.
Oh,
And there's a sloth in the restaurant. The restaurant just has these resident sloths that just hang out.
resident sloth.
And so I got to hold one. It was like a big dog, and it was really cool. But that was a fun experience going.
Yeah, I thought it was gonna be something scary. Thank God it's a sloth.
I know. It was peaceful, very peaceful.
So, anyways, moving on from college, take me through what brought you to Ecotone.
Yeah. So my college experience really brought that. I started out thinking I was going to do medicine and started on the med school pathway. So even though I was studying ecology and evolution, I was getting all my med school requirements completed. And my thought was that after graduating from Pitt, possibly go to med school or something else. I'm a person who likes to keep my options open. Or better yet, I like to make options for myself and create those options. And so I was doing that through focusing on medicine, focusing on ecology and evolution. And then I got involved in something called the Innovation Institute at Pitt. And anybody who asks, I will dive deep and tell them all about the Innovation Institute because I loved it. They got me hooked my freshman year, where you come together with a team, you create an idea on the back of a napkin or so, metaphorically speaking, and then you go through this process of turning that idea into a potential company idea. And we won the competition. It was like a 8-hour competition. We won. We got about $4,000, I think, at the time, and we all got to split it amongst ourselves. And I was hooked. So I kept doing that every single year. And by my senior year, after coming back from the Amazon rainforest, I was learning a lot more about deforestation because we saw that in the Amazon. And so here I was learning more about carbon emissions and eventually fell into learning about food waste and the carbon emissions from that. And parallel at the time, there was this project called the Aquaponics Project, where, like you talked about in the beginning, aquaponics, we had a shipping container with tilapia in the bottom, and we had a greenhouse on the roof of that. And so in the bottom, the tilapia were growing, they were pooping. We'd send that up through a series of pipes to the roof, and in these vertical columns, we were growing plants. And the idea there was to have a vertical farm in Pittsburgh to produce food for certain neighborhoods. We quickly learned that keeping tilapia in a shipping container in the winter in Pittsburgh was super hard to do to keep that insulated. So we scrapped that idea. And that's when I kind of came onto the team to join. There were a lot of students on the team at the time. And so I came on and we were switching from aquaponics to something called anaerobic digestion, which works like our stomachs, where food waste goes into a tank. Bacteria eats that food waste. It burps, produces methane gas. That methane gas can go be used for electricity production. And then what comes out of that tank is the basic nutrients from that broken down food waste. And that then becomes a fertilizer. That was the concept. And so I joined the team at the time. Eventually it became down to just 3 people. So Dylan Liu, myself, and Elliot Bennett. And then eventually we turned it into a company and built that from the ground up. So Dylan's the CEO, Elliot Bennett's the CFO, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer. And we founded it in 2019 and then have been growing it ever since.
So, for the people who don't know, what is your tagline to let them know what Ecotone Renewables is?
So our mission is to build a world without waste. What we do is we build these Zeus anaerobic digesters. Zeus stands for Zero Emission Upcycling System. And we build those in shipping containers, 8 by 20 foot shipping containers. There's no greenhouse on the roof of these, just the shipping container. What happens is food waste goes in, it goes through a series of pipes and tanks. We blend that food up into a gross smoothie that you don't want to drink or I don't want to drink, but the system will. And then the bacteria in the stomach breaks it all down. The bacteria burps, gives off that methane gas. We trap it, and we're working on turning that into the electricity to help run the system. And then, like I mentioned with the stomach, once it's finished producing or breaking down that food waste, it turns into a liquid. We siphon that off, and it's a fertilizer that we produce called soil sauce. So all of this is housed in those 8 by 20 foot standard shipping containers, and that's what we deploy around the country.
The secret sauce.
The secret sauce. Yep. In this case, soil sauce.
So let me ask you this. In terms of having this startup, what are some of the biggest challenges you guys have had to overcome?
Yeah, building a startup, that's always going to be challenging. And so you have to be ready for that. Just expect the unexpected. Something's going to go happen, whether it's very early on where we're starting to turn it from a project into a company and realizing we need capital, and then realizing, oh, we just had $10,000. Now we're at zero. Hey, Dylan, Elliot, do we have some money, personal money, that we can invest into this to get us back up and running a little bit? So that's a challenge of like running out of funding every once in a while and finding out where that's coming from. That was more of a challenge earlier on for us. Now we're at a good spot where we're generating more revenue
More
and everything,
sustainable.
keeping it in. Yep, very sustainable. But that's where it started. That was one of the biggest challenges. It's funding. The other challenge that any company or project's gonna face is the product market fit. I could have this amazing product that to me is my baby and I love it. I think it's the best thing in the world. But if I can't show that value to somebody else, like Ian, if I can't sell you this pen and you don't see the value in having that pen, then I don't have a company, right? I need to show you that this pen is super valuable for you because the smoothness of how you're writing with it is amazing, right? For simple terms of using a pen. So that product market fit and understanding who your customers actually are, that's a big aspect of running a startup, building a startup, and turning that startup into a full-fledged company. So, of course, that's a challenge, but I think it's also something that's it's growing pains, and it's a good challenge to have of understanding and targeting who those specific customers will be, who your stakeholders are, and showing that value for people.
You're very well spoken in terms of project management. And I'm sure a lot of that comes from your MBA, very recent MBA graduate.
Yeah, so a little bit more backstory. I guess after graduating from Pitt and starting with Ecotone, I actually did that in parallel. I left University of Pittsburgh, graduated, and started up as an admissions counselor right after. And the goal there was to stick with Pitt because I loved Pitt, and also generate some income for myself to support myself while I worked on Ecotone, which was still a project at the time. And so I did that in parallel for about 4 years, from 2019 to 2023. Now, while I was an admissions counselor, Pitt actually offers some discounts for employees to go back to school. So in the fall of 2022, I applied, got admitted to the MBA program at Pitt, Cat School of Business, and I started that in the winter of 23 as I was working on Ecotone and as I was an admissions counselor full time. I did that until the summer of 23, and then I left Pitt admissions. I went full time with Ecotone, and I went full time with the MBA, and I moved back to Pittsburgh because I was living in Philly at the time. And so when I went full time with the MBA, at that point I had about a year and a half left to go. And I figured, all right, well, this is going to help me grow a business over time. So I saw the value in doing that. And I was able to focus my concentrations on sustainable business as well as data analytics. So it was actually data programming. But I got to merge those two and focus on it during my MBA and really focus in and use Ecotone as a case study for pretty much all of my projects, which was super valuable.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And good on you, man. MBA is not easy.
No, it was definitely a challenge. You talk about challenges, but it was definitely worth it. And I'd push anybody to do it if they're interested.
So moving forward, the last thing that we're going to hit on before we do our artist spotlight, as we do with every single episode, what is the best possible life advice you can pass on to the people watching and listening?
It's always an interesting question. And I always think about what would I want to hear maybe 10 years ago or so. I'm a big proponent of following your passions, but I also understand that you need to support yourself with those passions. And so finding a way to merge your passion with an income, almost like finding that product market fit again, is the sweet spot. So I guess my advice is still to follow your passions, but just keep an honest focus with yourself that if you want your passion to succeed in keeping you afloat and bringing in income, you also need to understand how you can take your passion and also bring value to other people as well with that passion. And so that's something I constantly think about of terrarium building. That was a hobby of mine. It's also a passion of mine, but I want to keep it moving forward as something that I can provide for other people. So that's where we're talking to other people to figure out, would they want a terrarium or what is it that they're looking for? Why would they want a terrarium? That's where I'm trying to understand and how can I merge this passion with an interest that somebody else has, and keeping myself honest. If it's not something that other people would want to have, then all right, I pivot I keep my passion for as a hobby, but I realize that I need to bring in an income another way to support myself and keep me going.
Mm.
So follow your passions no matter what, but also keep in mind that you're going to need to make sure you can bring in income somehow too.
Hey, I'm with it. Now, getting into this week's artist spotlight, we'll be playing How Unlikely Home by Moontown PGH. I hope y'all enjoy. Hope y'all enjoyed How Unlikely Home by Moontown PGH. You'll be able to find them at Haven this Friday. Haven, Oakland's best and newest music venue, best place to find live music in Oakland. You'll be able to get tickets to watch them this Friday at the link in the description, haven.pgh. Now, getting into this week's topic, for the entire month of February, we've been doing this theme of breaking down the Black experience. It acts as a resource for Black people to know how to better go through their lives. It also serves as a resource for non-Black allies to empathize more with the Black experience. This week, we'll be touching on the topic of emotional vulnerability. As a Black man, or as Black men, we are in a very interesting position as society goes back and forth on whether we're too soft for having feelings, or if we should even have feelings to begin with, if we show our emotions, if we're losing our manhood, or if we should put on a gangster facade. I'm sure you're not a stranger to that in any way. But to open this up, let me ask you this. So, for the people watching and listening who are not aware, you had 3 siblings and you lost your 2 oldest siblings.
Mm-hmm.
How did you emotionally get through that with the context of being a Black man?
It's an interesting question. Yeah. I lost my first sibling in 2013, middle of high school, and then I lost my second sibling in 2023. And so very different times of my life. A decade, actually. So the whole concept of vulnerability, emotional vulnerability, I think the main focus there is understanding your emotions and allowing yourself to feel those emotions. So for myself, it was, and caveat this, I did grow up in a household where my father's a psychoanalyst and psychiatrist. So I was somewhat understanding of emotions, and we speak about emotions in our family a lot of time, and we were very open with that too. So I grew up in a household where it was okay to show your emotions and feel whatever you're feeling, and I think it's healthy. I think it's very healthy to release your emotions and understand them and recognize them for what they are. It may be difficult for some people to do that, and it may take some time as well. So when I lost my first sibling, my older sister, in 2013, I was in the middle of high school, and it, it was a shock. She was across the world, so she was in California, I was in Philadelphia. None of us were close by for her, and when she passed away, it felt unreal. Partly because she was so far away and she'd been in California, so it's like, oh, she's still out in California, but no, in reality, she's not there anymore. And I think where it became more real was during the funeral when I actually got to see her and then processing those emotions again. I think the first emotions that I may have felt then was, of course, sadness. I was very sad to lose my sister. And then maybe a bit of anger um, and confusion, perhaps. I think the anger may have come out of the confusion and difficulty in wrapping my head around the question of why. Why did this have to happen? So those are the first thoughts that kind of go through my head. It's like questioning why. Is this real? Um, how could we have changed this? Could I have done something more? And there may be that feeling of guilt of like, could I have done more? So right there's a lot of emotions: sadness, anger, fear, confusion, guilt. And that's a lot of emotions that if we aren't sure how to handle those, we can react in ways that may be deleterious for ourselves. And that's where I think it's important to understand emotions, to recognize them for what they are, kind of taking a step back after understanding those emotions and then learning how to process them in a healthy way that does not negatively impact ourselves or negatively impact others. And so for myself, what I found was the way for me to relieve some of those feelings were to talk about it with friends and family and have them as just sounding boards. They don't need to give advice, just being there to
Just a
listen.
vent.
The second way, if nobody's there, is using a journal. And I would journal a lot in high school and even in college. I'd write down all my thoughts and my feelings. And the thing I appreciated about journaling is it's written, so then I can go back and reflect on it. And even if, well, yeah, those are some of the ways. The other one was meditation, yoga, or working out. Working out was a great experience for me because I could go, and if I was frustrated, I'd push some bench press or do some squats and kind of relieve some of that frustration through a healthy manner. But that's the way I tried to look at it, is I need to relieve these emotions because they're bottling up inside of me and I don't necessarily know how to process them yet. And then slowly processing them one by one. And then realizing like there's certain things I just cannot change. So putting my energy towards the things I can change is more important than worrying about things I cannot change, because that just again brings up worry and fear about the unknown. And so losing my older sister, like those are some of the emotions I went through, and that was the first time. I wouldn't say the first time, but that was one of the times when somebody very close to me uh, passed away, and I had to realize how to work through that.
So let me ask you this. Through processing this grief, were there any habits that you had to unlearn?
Hmm. I would say through processing that grief, there wasn't necessarily habits that I'm currently conscious of that I had to unlearn. I do remember an experience starting off college where there were habits that I had to unlearn, and it was somewhat tied to that.
Mm.
So I graduated high school in 2015 and went to college. And during that time, I lost an aunt who passed away. I lost my grandfather who passed away. And I pushed myself a little too hard at track and ended up in the hospital because I was dehydrated. And at that time of these close deaths and also me being in the hospital, I just was like, I'm not supposed to be here in the hospital right now. This is not comfortable for me. And so I had these ideas and thoughts of death and experiencing, questioning what it's like. And somewhat, there became a little bit of fear around, am I going to pass away soon? How long is life? Since my older sister passed away at age 28. So that's where moving into college, I really picked up a lot of the meditation, yoga, and journaling because I was stressed out. And since track and running and dehydrating myself put me in the hospital, I would have anxiety around running, which I found is a very peaceful, relaxing, enjoyable activity. And so I needed other experiences to relieve that stress and anxiety other than running. That's where I dove into these other areas. And then anxiety led me into college where I was concerned that I'd be going back into the hospital if I worked out too much. And I was getting into a habit here. So I read a couple books. One was called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And it talks about the idea of a habit is a cue, a routine, and a reward. So the cue for me might have been going to the gym, walking on the treadmill. That was the cue. The routine was starting to worry about my health and getting anxious because I think I'd put myself back in the hospital. And the reward, which isn't really a reward for me, but the reward was having a little anxiety attack and then feeling better after that. And that was a habit I needed to rewire because that wasn't healthy for me. So I got out a calendar. Every time something happened in this somewhat of a habit, I'd write it down on the calendar. I'd sit through the feelings, and then I'd jot down everything bad that actually happened, which wasn't anything. It was just me having a little anxiety attack. And so I rewired my mind a little bit to say, when that cue happened, I would be conscious of it. Instead of going into that routine that is unconscious, I rewrote that routine of, okay, I'm feeling anxious. Let me start writing down what was happening and realizing that nothing's actually going to happen based off this historic data that I've been tracking. Nothing actually happened during these little panic attacks. And so I logic my way out of getting into a panic attack. And the reward was actually a reward was I didn't get into a panic attack. I just relaxed, took a break, maybe meditated, and got back into the routine of things.
So you rein in your emotions with logic.
I kind of did. Yeah, I reined them in with a little bit of understanding and realization and putting into a different perspective of like nothing's actually going on. I'm okay.
So let me ask you this. You said that that part of the way that you're emotionally vulnerable is by talking with your friends about things that happen. How did you find those friends and how did you create a safe space where you can just talk to each other about that?
I'm somebody who will talk to anybody. So I'm just very open. I'll talk to a stranger on the elevator just to learn about them in those 10 seconds of going from one floor to another. So if anybody's open to listening, I will talk. But I've always had some close friends who I knew in high school, in elementary school, and then in college who I'd hang out with all the time. And they were close enough to me that they knew about these things of my siblings passing away or me ending up in the hospital for running track. And so we'd open up. They would actually reach out and just check in on me because sometimes when I used to want to open up, I'd also feel like I was a burden. And I'd be concerned that I'd be a burden on somebody else by telling them all this stuff or asking them to listen while I just vent. And so that kind of held me back a little bit from opening up sometimes. But from constantly listening to my friends, both men and women, they reassured me that I wasn't a burden and that they're there to support me if need be. So I think it came over time of building these relationships and friendships. And I realized that becoming more vulnerable with your friends actually deepens that friendship and relationship, which I'm always about, is building those relationships with people. And even with strangers, I'll open up about some personal thing in my life and they open up about something personal in their life.
And that's where it starts.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's healthy to be vulnerable. I feel stronger when I'm vulnerable because I know that I can be vulnerable. I'm not holding anything in and I'm confident in my vulnerability. I don't see anything wrong with that.
Amen. Now, for this next question, I want you to speak directly to a Black man who is watching this. Why should they drop the facade and I completely lost where I was going with this.
Well, you're talking about the facade. You mentioned earlier, I think you used the word ghetto, like the ghetto idea, or like we'll use gangster. Yes, yes. I think using the word facade in general, facade is a mask, pretty much. I don't want to give somebody a reason for why they should drop a facade. I would actually ask them to think for themselves why they have the facade. What is it they are shielding themselves from? Because the way I believe it, a facade is masking something, whether it's your something. A facade is masking perhaps part of your personality that you're not comfortable with sharing with other people. And that can be okay. The question is why? I think that's something for each individual to think deeply about for themselves and understand, is the why because they truly for themselves don't want to share that with other people? That's okay, but then why don't you want to share it? Is it because they would be concerned about being judged for whatever that part of the personality is? And then asking, does that matter to be judged? That's up for them to decide.
I feel like for a lot of people, part of the reason that, or a lot of Black men specifically, part of the reason that we keep up that facade is to appear masculine. Because we're told that showing emotions is not masculine.
And then we'll be judged. Whether it's being masculine or not masculine, that's a judgment being made by somebody or society telling us that we are not masculine for showing our emotions. And so then thinking about, does it matter? What does masculinity mean? And rewriting the whole idea of masculinity starts with the individual, what their belief of masculinity is, then trickles into how they see themselves, and then how society will see them. So I think it really depends on that individual and why they may think they wouldn't be seen as masculine as much, if that's even what it is that they're looking to come off as by hiding their emotions. I do think like Black men, growing up, I do think that there is a unwritten rule or saying that Black men should not show emotions or should be strong. And I can open that up to just men in general should be strong, partly for their family, for their loved ones. They're the rock, right? And I think I can understand that part of the being strong. It comes from a masculine idea of the male being the dominant portion of the family, the hierarchy of the family. But I think as we learn more and more, it's a strong family, a strong relationship is built between the two individuals in that relationship. So it doesn't really fall on just one person. And I think the whole rewriting about what masculinity looks like starts again with the individual, and then that trickles out into what society is, because that individual's perspective, they grow up, they share their perspective, that becomes society eventually.
And society is just made up of individuals.
Exactly. So. Similar to that organism being made of tissues and other organs. So it's all coming together almost like an ecosystem, like we talked about very early on. So again, I'm not going to say drop the facade. I'm going to say reflect on the facade and understand where it comes from. Truly understand where it comes from, and then decide for yourself if you are being true to yourself or if you're putting on a facade for other people. And if it's for other people, understand why. Is because we want to be liked. There's always something we're looking for. Or there's always a way in which we perceive ourselves in the context of society, and we are trying to uphold that perspective of ourselves for other people to see. So just fully understanding where that comes from and why we're doing that is where it comes back to whether we drop the facade or not.
I think that's genuinely life-changing advice. I really hope you watching, I do truly hope that you ask yourself why you hold the mask up and answer that difficult question. Now, before we get out of here, is there anything else you'd like to get across to our audience?
It's another good question. Of course, if they want to reach out, they can. I'm always happy to talk with people. I'm excited for where everybody goes with their own lives. It's truly an interesting experience living life and creating your own path. Uh, I find so much enjoyment in it, especially creating a company, because that is building something from the ground up that wasn't existing before, and learning how to build it with a group of team members, and doing that all together. It's really enjoyable, and uh, so I'm super excited where any of your podcast listeners, where they go with their own lives, and of course, if they want to reach out and ask any questions, I'm happy to listen, happy to answer, and happy to chat.
As always, all things Ecotone Renewables and all things Kyle will be in the description of the episode. Um, Again, y'all, this is Kyle Wyche, COO of Ecotone Renewables. This has been another incredible episode of the Let's Talk Social Innovation podcast, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your week. Peace out, yo.